This is how Idaho suspect Bryan Kohberger was caught. You're looking at the arrest affidavit that was just recently released, and we've learned some disturbing details on just how this case unfolded, and including the evidence that was gathered that really led to the arrest of Bryan Kohberger. And again, if you don't know who he is, this is what he looks like. He is the prime suspect in the quadruple stabbing of 4 University of Idaho students who were murdered in their residence just off campus. And going through the affidavit, we learn that on November 13th, 2022, investigators would come out, Idaho State Police would get involved, FBI would get involved, and they walk into the residence, and on the second floor, they're seeing 2 of the students. Okay, you've got Zaina and Ethan, who appeared to have been stabbed by an edged weapon. Okay, they seem to be consistent with an edged weapon, and also what was mentioned was sharp force injuries. Okay, when they go to the 3rd floor, they find that Kaylee and Madison were also stabbed and had visible stab wounds. But here's the interesting part about the DNA that we learned from this affidavit. We learned that there appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath that was laying on the bed next to Madison. And this sheath had the inscription K-bar from USMC, which is the United States Marine Corps. And I want to show you that knife. If you're looking here, it's a very long fixed bladed knife, and it does typically come with one of these leather sheaths. Right here, you've got this little button, this little snap button here. That's where police located DNA evidence that ultimately matched to Bryan Kohberger. So that was left behind on the scene apparently, and it was collected as evidence. Now, a couple things here. A lot of people thought that there would most likely be blood evidence because it's an inside crime. The potential for DNA transfer is massive, and it didn't mention that in this affidavit. Now, there's still, again, a lot of questions, and it's possible that there's a lot more evidence that just wasn't uncovered in this arrest affidavit yet, because evidence still could be being processed. But it would be likely that if he was stabbing somebody multiple times, oftentimes they do get cut, and there is blood evidence from a suspect. There's been many arrests, many cases involving this. But we also know a few things, which I'll talk about later in this affidavit, that he was a student of criminology and most likely used gloves because they didn't seem to get fingerprint evidence. He did try to cover his tracks, which we'll talk about a little bit more here. So as we're going through the affidavit, the survivors in the house, the other 2 residents, they gave statements to police, and they believed that the other 4 occupants, the other students killed, were at the home by 2 a.m. and were either asleep or in their rooms by approximately 4 a.m. Okay, except for Zaina, who apparently had a DoorDash order around 4 a.m. Okay, now this is really interesting here, what this roommate explains to police happened after. So this roommate saying that they went to sleep in their bedroom and they were awoken at about 4 a.m. What sounded like one of the roommates was playing with her dog in the upstairs bedroom on the 3rd floor. And so she thought she heard something to the effect of, "There's someone here." Okay. Now, a download of Zaina's phone showed that she was most likely awake because her TikTok app was being used at approximately 4:12 a.m. But this other roommate who's alive, right, who was not killed, this person's looking out their bedroom and they don't see anything, but then they open their door a second time and they think they hear crying from Zaina's room, and then someone, a male voice, an unknown male voice, saying something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." So very disturbing. Apparently there is somebody in the house, and this roommate is hearing some strange sounds, the dog's barking, and then this person hears what they think is a whimper followed by a loud thud. So the dog's barking, and this roommate opens her door for the third time and actually hears crying. But then the person sees someone in black, just black clothing with a mask that actually covers the nose and the mouth. This roommate describes this person as about 5'10" or taller, a male, not very muscular, with bushy eyebrows. Okay, so apparently they're frozen. They're in shock that they're seeing this, and then they see this male walk towards the back sliding glass door. And then this roommate locked herself in her room. And, it's interesting, though, because the call to 911 wasn't made until later in the afternoon. So there's a lot of unanswered questions, wondering what's going on, if this person was just in shock or maybe thought they were seeing things or dreaming things and didn't think much of it since it was so early in the morning. Leave a comment below what you think happened. I'm sure there's a lot more reports on this now. I'd be very curious to see what y'all think about that with the roommate and seeing this unknown person inside the residence and then leaving. So continuing on with the affidavit, police did find a latent shoe print. Okay, they actually they'd used a presumptive blood test and then amino black, which is a protein stain that detects the presence of cellular material. So this ends up detecting the shoe print with a diamond pattern of a Vans type of shoe sole. Okay, so they located that as evidence as well. Okay, police then did a video canvass of the area around the King Road residence. So they're looking at residential areas, businesses, and they're collecting all of these videos. And this is paramount to this case, as you're going to find out here. They collected a lot of videos. And what they start determining is a few things. One, they find footage of a white sedan, which is now suspect vehicle 1. We would later learn that this was the Hyundai Elantra that police were looking for in this investigation and asking the public's help for. Now, in this video, okay, this was approximately, I'll give you a lot of different time frames here, but that suspect vehicle was not displaying a front license plate. So in Washington state, where the suspect, Bryan, was living in Pullman, Washington, you do need the front and the back plate. But he has this front plate, and so they're starting to piece together, okay, what is with this vehicle? They see that it actually makes 3 passes near the residence, where the victims were killed, and then it actually makes a 4th pass where it's trying to park. Okay, so this is approximately at 3:29 a.m. and ends at 4:20 a.m. Okay, and then it can be seen again the last time. This is the 4th pass at 4:04 a.m. So this is when the vehicle was stopping, and this is apparently when this crime was about to take place. Was about when this vehicle's parking at 4:04 a.m. and then moving beyond that time frame. So at 4:20 a.m., so you got 4:04 and then 4:20 a.m., that vehicle is seen leaving at a high rate of speed away from that residence. Okay, now this is what's interesting with the tracking of this vehicle. They find videos that track this Elantra out of Moscow and into Whitman County, which is in Washington. Okay, and this road leads to Pullman, Washington, which is where Bryan Kohberger resided as a student himself, a PhD student. Now, the video evidence here, they send it to the FBI. They're trying to determine what type of year, make, model it is. And so this FBI forensic examiner believed the vehicle was a 2011 to 2013 model, but also indicated it could be a 2011 to a 2016 Elantra. Okay, Bryan's vehicle was a 2015 Elantra, so it fit within that assumption there with that vehicle based on all the video footage that they gathered. Now I want to get into more of the surveillance cameras here. Okay, so just to recap, police have this white sedan, this Elantra, that they've been tracking out of Moscow into Washington state now, which they continue to observe through cameras on the campus of Washington State University, which is in Pullman, Washington. Okay, so they're still looking at all these cameras, and they see this same sedan at about 5:25 a.m. actually pull onto the campus. So it's corroborating when the crime scene occurred, when this vehicle's leaving, where it's ending up, and they're starting to document all these time frames and all the cameras that they've collected as evidence. Okay, so you've got that. They've got some diagrams and maps of the particular route that they believed was traveled with that vehicle. So on November 25th, this is when they start asking the public to be on the lookout for the Elantra. Okay, on November 29th, a Washington State University police officer apparently does a query of vehicles in that area that fit that mold of that white Elantra. And he finds one with a license plate from Pennsylvania that was registered to Bryan Kohberger. Okay, so from there, they zone in on Bryan's vehicle in that location off Washington State University. They do they run his registration, they get his Washington license, and they look at what he looks like. And so he's a white male, about 6 feet, 185 pounds, and he has these bushy eyebrows that was mentioned by witness statements. So he seems to match the description of this possible suspect. So police have documented that. Next, we learn a few other bits in this case. We knew that Bryan Kohberger was stopped in a traffic stop in Moscow in August of 2022. From that stop, they got his phone number, and that's going to be very important in this case. So they actually have his phone number, which was from AT&T, and they also learned that his plates were expiring on November 30th, so he actually now has Washington plates on that same Elantra. So he makes me wonder if that was part of his planning in this case. He only had the front plate, or he had no front plate, may not have had any plates on the vehicle when this crime was committed, and then he recently registered the vehicle afterwards in Washington. So that may have been part of his planning on his part to evade law enforcement. But he did re-register his vehicle, so now he has a Washington registration with the Elantra, and then we're gonna keep going into this trail that police are on here that's going to lead to his capture here. So again, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and we still don't have all the police reports or anything like that. But at this point in the investigation, we did learn that Bryan Kohberger was driving home with his father back to Pennsylvania from Washington, and police had stopped him a few other times. So on December 13th, 2022, a license plate reader picked him up in Colorado. And then there was also footage of a couple traffic stops in Indiana. This was on December 16th, where he was stopped for speeding and tailgating. There are some reports that believe, and it's not mentioned in this report, but the FBI actually advised the Indiana police to stop Bryan Kohberger so that they could actually get video images of his hands. They wanted to see if there were injuries consistent with knife wounds from the stabbing, and they were going to collect that as evidence as they were building a case around him, because they're clearly zoned in on him, and apparently they are actually surveilling him. The FBI is surveilling him as he's traveling from Washington back to Pennsylvania, and then they ultimately arrested him in Pennsylvania. But following on here with this trail, he did get back to Pennsylvania, and he was with family. And then it goes on to explain his background. So most of us know this already, but for those of you that don't, he was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University. He had an undergraduate degree in psychology. Another interesting part here is that he also studied cloud-based forensics. So there's reports of this individual, being apparently a highly intelligent student, really interested in the criminal mind. He's putting essays together and really trying to understand how these crimes are committed and the mindset of these criminals. And people are saying that, this type of individual is going to be studied for years because it's just not likely that a PhD student would commit such a heinous crime like this. And so they just find it unique. And I'm curious about your thoughts on that as well. You can comment about all of this. I'm very curious what you all have to say about this case. So they did obtain some search warrants for his cellular device, okay? And they're looking at all the cell towers. And this is really important for this case because the phone and the Elantra, they're tracking the times and the dates, and they seem to correspond. So we're going to talk about that starting with November 13th, which is when the crime took place. Okay, so on November 13th, between 3 and 5 a.m., they learned that they didn't really find any returns from Bryan's phone between 3 and 5 a.m. So from their experience, they believe that he either turned his phone off, put it into airplane mode, or left his phone at a different location before committing the crime. But what Bryan didn't take into account is the activity before the crime and after, which they're going to pick up on a lot of that cell phone data. So it seems like he tried to evade law enforcement based on this affidavit. Again, he is considered innocent until proven guilty. But just based on this affidavit is what I'm sharing with you here, what they found. And what they did find is, they believed that he surveilled the area, the home, before, and then was also around that area multiple times. Okay, that's not uncommon for people to surveil an area with their phone because they're not committing a crime on that particular day. So it goes on to talk about things like that in the affidavit. And then they do get the search warrant for the data between November 12th and November 14th through AT&T. So what they find is once they get all his data, they have a special agent that analyzes it and is part of the cellular analysis survey team is what they call it. And they look at all that data. And here's what they find. They do find that at 2:42 a.m. on November 13th, Bryan's phone is showing coverage in Pullman, Washington at his residence where he lives. Then at 2:47 a.m., it actually shows that it's now traveling. The phone is leaving that residence and traveling through Pullman, Washington. Okay, this is consistent with the movement of the white Elantra at this time. So they're actually showing his phone and the Elantra leaving around that time. Okay, then it shows that the network becomes disabled. That's probably when he turned it into airplane mode or turned it off. Then you don't see any activity. But then you start to see his activity again on his phone at 4:48 a.m. Okay, so now you're seeing it in Moscow, and between 4:50 and 5:26 a.m., it's traveling down those roads now towards Washington. So you can actually see through the data, he's leaving his residence, he shuts down his information, and then you see it pick up again from Moscow back to Pullman where he lives, and then he just goes back home. But here's another interesting bit of information. We know that these suspects typically go back to revisit the scene, or they come back to that area multiple times to kind of revisit that crime for satisfaction or many different reasons. But in this case, apparently at about 9 a.m., it did show his phone leaving his residence and going back to Moscow, Idaho. So this was about 9 a.m. And this was, of course, still before that 911 call was made. And then it goes back to his residence at 9:32 a.m. So that was interesting right there. And then Couple other just things here. We're almost done. This is a long video, but there's just a lot of information I wanted to get out in this, and I'll probably pull snippets of this apart and do shorter videos. But typically, when I do these affidavit videos, they're fairly long. So hopefully, you're following along and you've been able to pick up on some interesting insights in this case. Okay, other important information here. We're almost to the end of this affidavit, but we did learn that he most likely stalked these victims prior to the offense. So again, looking at the phone data, they actually looked at his phone, and they found that from June 23rd, 2022, when he activates this phone, to just after the crime, they look through all these data records, and they find that on at least 12 occasions prior to the crime, that phone was seen in the area of the victim's home. So typically from 10:34 p.m. to 11:35 p.m., that cellular data was showing in that area. So he was spending some time stalking these victims and preparing for this crime, if in fact he is guilty of this crime. But when we continue to look through some of the other records here, they did also recover trash from the Kohberger family residence in Pennsylvania, and apparently there was a DNA profile that was obtained from the sheath, as I mentioned, that came back to Bryan Kohberger, his family. They talk about this DNA, the possibility being the suspect's biological father, expected to be excluded from. So when they're just talking about the labs and the DNA analysis there, they got DNA from the trash to match with the sheath DNA, and that led to the arrest. So I'll do another video of how he was caught when I know more details of the case, but that is the overview of how he was arrested in this case, and he's still in court to be tried for this. So he has been arrested for felony burglary and murder of those 4 college students. That's all I have for you now, and I'll be back in another video, y'all. Take care.